Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening from wherever you're watching or listening. My name is Caleb Glick. I'm a lawyer here in the great state of Texas with the Calhoun School of Law to bring you a lot of information that plenty of bad folks would rather you not have. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we'll provide another installation to our series on the Lincoln-Douglas debates, going on the second joint debate. So if you haven't gone back and watched the first one, I encourage you to do so, because understanding the actual ideas and the beliefs of both of these figures, but obviously the more notable figure, Mr. Lincoln, will play greatly to your benefit when understanding the circumstances surrounding what would inevitably become the War of Northern Aggression, the war between the states, whichever name you'd like to give it, and how the reframing of the Union has led us to the detrimental ends it has brought us to, and irreversibly caused us to beg the question, should the U.S. Constitution be reconsidered, be replaced? So let's go ahead and jump on over to the transcript from the Lincoln-Douglas debates. This one took place in Freeport on August 27th, 1858. Mr. Lincoln gets to speak first because Mr. Douglas went first in the first joint debate. So Mr. Lincoln says this: "Ladies and gentlemen, on Saturday last, Judge Douglas and myself first met in public discussion. He spoke 1 hour, I an hour and a half, and he replied for half an hour. The order is now reversed. I am to speak an hour, he an hour and a half, and then I am to reply for half an hour. I propose to devote myself during the first hour to the scope of what was brought within the range of his half-hour speech at Ottawa. I will take up the judge's interrogatories as I find them printed in the Chicago Times and answer them seriatim. In order that there may be no mistake about it, I have copied the interrogatories in writing and also my answers to them. As to the first one in regard to the fugitive slave law, I have never hesitated to say, and I do not now hesitate to say, that I think under the Constitution of the United States, the people of the southern states are entitled to a congressional fugitive slave law. Having said that, I have had nothing to say in regard to the existing fugitive slave law, further than that I think it should have been framed so as to be free from some of the objections that pertain to it without lessening its efficiency. And inasmuch as we are now, good grief, let me try that again. And inasmuch as we are not now in an agitation in regard to an alteration or a modification of that law, I would not be the man to introduce it as a new subject of agitation upon the general question of slavery. In regard to the other question of whether I am pledged to the admission of any more slave states into the Union, I state to you very frankly that I would be exceedingly sorry ever to be put in a position of having to pass upon that question. I should be exceedingly glad to know that there would never be another slave state admitted into the Union. But I must add that if slavery shall be kept out of the territories during the territorial existence of any one given territory, and then the people shall, having a fair chance and a clear field, when they come to adopt the Constitution, do such an extraordinary thing as to adopt a slave constitution, uninfluenced by the actual presence of the institution among them, I see no alternative, if we own the country, but to admit them into the Union." The third interrogatory is answered by the answer to the second, it being, as I conceive, the same as the second. The fourth one is in regard to the abolition of slavery in the District of Columbia. In relation to that, I have my mind very distinctly made up. I should be exceedingly glad to see slavery abolished in the District of Columbia. I believe that Congress possesses the constitutional power to abolish it. Yet, as a member of Congress, I should not, with my present views, be in favor of endeavoring to abolish slavery in the District of Columbia unless it would be upon these conditions. First, that the abolition should be gradual. Second, that it should be on a vote of the majority of qualified voters in the district. And third, that compensation should be made to unwilling owners. With these three conditions, I confess I would be exceedingly glad to see Congress abolish slavery in the District of Columbia and, in the language of Henry Clay, quote, "sweep from our capital that foul blot upon our nation." In regard to the fifth interrogatory, I must say here that as to the question of the abolition of the slave trade between the different states, I can truly answer, as I have, that I am pledged to nothing about it. It is a subject to which I have not given that mature consideration that would make me feel authorized to state a position so as to hold myself entirely bound by it. In other words, that question has never been prominently enough before me to induce me to investigate whether we really have the constitutional power to do it. I could investigate it if I had sufficient time to bring myself to a conclusion upon that subject, but I have not done so, and I say so frankly to you here and to Judge Douglas. I must say, however, that if I should be of opinion that Congress does possess the constitutional power to abolish the slave trade among the different states, I should still not be in favor of the exercise of that power unless upon some conservative principle, as I conceive it, akin to what I have said in relation to the abolition of slavery in the District of Columbia. My answer as to whether I desire that slavery should be prohibited in all the territories of the United States is full and explicit within itself, and cannot be made clearer by any comments of mine. So I suppose in regard to the question whether I am opposed to the acquisition of any more territory unless slavery is first prohibited therein, my answer is such that I could add nothing by way of illustration or making myself better understood than the answer which I have placed in writing. I now proceed to propound to the judge the interrogatories so far as I have framed them. I will bring forward a new installment when I get them ready. I will bring them forward now, only reaching to number 4. The first one is, question 1. If the people of Kansas shall, by means entirely unobjectionable in all other respects, adopt a state constitution and ask admission into the Union under it, before they have the requisite number of inhabitants according to the English bill, some 93,000, will you vote to admit them? Question 2. Can the people of a United States territory in any lawful way against the wish of any citizen of the United States exclude slavery from its limits prior to the formation of a state constitution? Question 3. If the Supreme Court of the United States shall decide that states cannot exclude slavery from their limits, are you in favor of acquiescing in, adopting, and following such decision as a rule of political action? In question 4, are you in favor of acquiring additional territory in disregard of how such acquisition may affect the nation on the slavery question? Go on, Judge Douglas. So here is Mr. Douglas's reply. He says, "Ladies and gentlemen, the silence with which you have listened to Mr. Lincoln during his hour is creditable to this vast audience, composed of men of various political parties. Nothing is more honorable to any large mass of people assembled for the purpose of a fair discussion than that kind and respectful attention that is yielded not only to your political friends, but to those who are opposed to you in politics. I am glad that at last I have brought Mr. Lincoln to the conclusion that he had better define his position on certain political questions to which I called his attention at Ottawa. He there showed no disposition, no inclination to answer them. I did not present idle questions for him to answer merely for my gratification. I laid the foundation for those interrogatories by showing that they constituted the platform of the party whose nominee he is for the Senate. I did not presume that I had the right to catechize him as I saw proper, unless I showed that his party, or a majority of it, stood upon the platform and were in favor of the propositions upon which my questions were based. I desired simply to know, inasmuch as he had been nominated as the first, last, and only choice of his party, whether he concurred in the platform which that party had adopted for its government. In a few moments I will proceed to review the answers which he has given to these interrogatories. But in order to relieve his anxiety, I will first respond to these which he has presented to me. Mark you, he has not presented interrogatories which have ever received the sanction of the party with which I am acting, and hence he has no other foundation for them than his own curiosity. First, he desires to know if the people of Kansas shall form a constitution by means entirely proper and unobjectionable, and ask admission into the Union as a state, before they have the requisite population for a member of Congress, whether I will vote for that admission. I will answer his question. In reference to Kansas, it is my opinion that as she has population enough to constitute a slave state, she has people enough for a free state. I will not make Kansas an exceptional case to the other states of the Union. I hold it to be a sound rule of universal application to require a territory to contain the requisite population. On another occasion, I proposed that neither Kansas nor any other territory should be admitted until it had the requisite population. Congress did not adopt any of my propositions containing this general rule, but did make an exception of Kansas. I will stand by that exception. Either Kansas must come in as a free state, with whatever population she may have, or the rule must be applied to all the other territories alike. I therefore answer at once that, it having been decided that Kansas has people enough for a slave state, I hold that she has enough for a free state. I hope Mr. Lincoln is satisfied with my answer, and now I would like to get his answer to his own interrogatory, whether or not he will vote to admit Kansas before she has the requisite population. I want to know whether he will vote to admit Oregon before that territory has the requisite population. I would like Mr. Lincoln to answer this question. I would like him to take his own medicine. The next question propounded to me by Mr. Lincoln is, can the people of a territory, in any lawful way, against the wishes of any citizen of the United States, exclude slavery from their limits prior to the formation of a state constitution? I answer emphatically, as Mr. Lincoln has heard me answer 100 times from every stump in Illinois, that in my opinion the people of a territory can, by lawful means, exclude slavery from their limits prior to the formation of a state constitution. It matters not what way the Supreme Court may hereafter decide as to the abstract question whether slavery may or may not go into a territory under the Constitution. The people have the lawful means to introduce it or exclude it as they please, for the reason that slavery cannot exist a day or an hour anywhere unless it is supported by local police regulations. Those police regulations can only be established by the local legislature. And if the people are opposed to slavery, they will elect representatives to that body who will by unfriendly legislation effectually prevent the introduction of it into their midst. If, on the contrary, they are for it, their legislature will favor its extension. Hence, no matter what the decision of the Supreme Court may be on that abstract question, still the right of the people to make a slave territory or a free territory is perfect and complete under the Nebraska bill. I hope Mr. Lincoln deems my answer satisfactory on that point. The third question which Mr. Lincoln presented is, if the Supreme Court of the United States shall decide that a state of this Union cannot exclude slavery from its own limits, will I submit to it? I am amazed that Lincoln should ask such a question. A schoolboy knows better is an interjection. So back to what Mr. Douglas is saying. Yes, a schoolboy does know better. Mr. Lincoln's object is to cast an imputation upon the Supreme Court. He might as well ask me, suppose Mr. Lincoln should steal a horse, would I sanction it? And it would be as general in me to ask him, in the event he stole a horse, what ought to be done with him. He casts an imputation upon the Supreme Court of the United States by supposing that they would violate the Constitution of the United States. I tell him that such a thing is not possible. It would be an act of moral treason that no man on the bench could ever descend to. Mr. Lincoln himself would never in his partial feelings so far forget what was right as to be guilty of such an act. The fourth question of Mr. Lincoln is, are you in favor of acquiring additional territory in disregard as to how such acquisition may affect the Union on the slavery question? This question is very ingeniously and cunningly put. The Black Republican Creed lays it down expressly that under no circumstances shall we acquire any more territory unless slavery is first prohibited in the country. I asked Mr. Lincoln whether he is in favor of that proposition. Are you, he's addressing Mr. Lincoln, opposed to the acquisition of any more territory under any circumstances unless slavery is prohibited in it? That he does not like to answer. When I ask him whether he stands up to that article in the platform of his party, he turns, Yankee fashion, and without answering it, asks me whether I am in favor of acquiring territory without regard to how it may affect the Union on the slavery question. I answer that whenever it becomes necessary, in our growth and progress to acquire more territory, that I am in favor of it without reference to the question of slavery. And when we have acquired it, I will leave the people free to do as they please, either to make it slave or free territory as they prefer. I trust now that Mr. Lincoln will deem himself answered on his 4 points. He racked his brains so much in devising these 4 questions that he exhausted himself and had not strength enough to invent the others. As soon as he is able to hold a council with his advisors, Lovejoy, Farnsworth, and Fred Douglass, he will frame and propound others. Good, another interjection. So back to Mr. Douglas. You Black Republicans who say good, I have no doubt think that they are all good men. I have reason to recollect that some people in this country think that Fred Douglass is a very good man. The last time I came here to make a speech, while talking from the stand to you people of Freeport, as I am doing today, I saw a carriage, and a magnificent one it was, drive up and take a position on the outside of the crowd. A beautiful young lady was sitting on the box seat, while Fred Douglass and her mother reclined inside, and the owner of the carriage acted as driver. I saw this in your own town. What of it? Another interjection. So now back to Douglas. All I have to say of it is this, that if you Black Republicans think that the Negro ought to be on a social equality with your wives and daughters and ride in a carriage with your wife whilst you drive the team, you have perfect right to do so. I am told that one of Fred Douglass's kinsmen, another rich Black Negro, is now traveling in this part of the state making speeches for his friend Lincoln as the champion of the black men. What have you to say against it? Another interjection. So now Douglas replies. All I have to say on that subject is that those of you who believe that the Negro is your equal and ought to be on an equality with you socially, politically, and legally, have a right to entertain those opinions, and of course will vote for Mr. Lincoln. Now, there are a great many black Republicans of you who do not know this thing was done. White, white, and great clamor. So another interjection. Mr. Douglas responds, I wish to remind you that while Mr. Lincoln was speaking, there was not a Democrat vulgar and blackguard enough to interrupt him. But I know that the shoe is pinching you. I am clinching Lincoln now, and you are scared to death for the result. I have seen this thing before. I have seen men make appointments for joint discussions, and the moment their man has been heard, try to interrupt and prevent a fair hearing of the other side. I have seen your mobs before and defy your wrath. Tremendous applause. So another interjection. Back to what Mr. Douglas is saying. My friends, do not cheer, for I need my whole time. Mr. Lincoln lays down the doctrine that this union cannot endure, divided as our fathers made it, with free and slave states. He says they must all become one thing or all the other, that they must all be free or all slave, or else the union cannot continue to exist. It being his opinion that to admit any more slave states to continue to divide the union into free and slave states will dissolve it. I want to know of Mr. Lincoln whether he will vote for the admission of another slave state. He tells you the union cannot exist unless the states are all free or all slave. He tells you that he is opposed to making them all slave, and hence he is for making them all free in order that the union may exist. And yet he will not say that he will not vote against another slave state, knowing that the union must be dissolved if he votes for it. I ask you if that is fair dealing. Show me that it is my duty, in order to save the Union, to do a particular act, and I will do it if the Constitution does not prohibit it. I am not for the dissolution of the Union under any circumstances. I will pursue no course of conduct that will give just cause for the dissolution of the Union. The hope of the friends of freedom throughout the world rests upon the perpetuity of this Union. The downtrodden and oppressed people who are suffering under European despotism all look with hope and anxiety to the American Union as the only resting place and permanent home of freedom and self-government. I know Mr. Lincoln's object. He wants to divide the Democratic Party in order that he may defeat me and get to the Senate. So now here is Mr. Lincoln's reply. He says, My friends, it will readily occur to you that I cannot in half an hour notice all the things that so able a man as Judge Douglas can say in an hour and a half. And I hope, therefore, if there be anything that he has said upon which you would like to hear something from me, but which I omit to comment upon, you will bear in mind that it would be expecting an impossibility for me to go over his whole ground. I can but take up some of the points that he has dwelt upon, and employ my half hour specially on them. The first thing I have to say to you is a word in regard to Judge Douglas's declaration about the vulgarity and blackguardism in the audience. That no such thing, as he says, was shown by any Democrat while I was speaking. Now, I only wish, by way of reply on this subject, to say that while I was speaking, I used no vulgarity or blackguardism toward any Democrat. He says I do not declare I would in any event vote for the admission of a slave state into the Union. If I have been fairly reported, he will see that I did give an explicit answer to his interrogatories. I did not really say that I would dislike to be put to the test, but I said clearly if I were put to the test, and a territory from which slavery had been excluded should present herself with a state constitution sanctioning slavery, a most extraordinary thing and wholly unlikely to happen, I did not see how I could avoid voting for her admission. But he refuses to understand that I said so, and he wants this audience to understand that I did not say so. Yet it will be so reported in the printed speech that he cannot help seeing it. He says if I should vote for the admission of a slave state, I would be voting for a dissolution of the Union because I hold that the Union cannot permanently exist half slave and half free. I repeat that I do not believe this government can endure permanently half slave and half free, yet I do not admit, nor does it at all follow, that the admission of a single slave state will permanently fix the character and establish this as a universal slave nation. The judge is very happy indeed at working up these quibbles. His hope rested on the idea of enlisting the great, quote, Black Republican Party and making it the tail of his new kite. He knows he was expecting from day to day to turn Republican and place himself at the head of our organization. He has found that these despised, quote, Black Republicans estimate him by a standard which he has taught them none too well. Hence he is crawling back into his old camp, and you will find him eventually installed in full fellowship among those whom he was then battling, and with whom he now pretends to be at such fearful variance. Says here a loud applause and cries of go on, are exclaimed. And Mr. Lincoln says, I cannot, gentlemen, my time has expired. And that is the end of the second joint debate. If you have any questions about what was said during the second debate, any questions about what was said in the first debate, or maybe there's a legal topic you'd like me to cover in a future lecture, go ahead and post those down in the comments, because the entire purpose of the Calhoun School of Law is to equip you with the necessary skills and information to combat any sort of lawfare that will be waged against you, your loved ones, or your hard-earned property. So please, if you have any questions, go ahead and post them down in the comments. Excellent. So my name is Caleb Glick. I'm a lawyer here in the great state of Texas with the Calhoun School of Law to bring you a lot of information that plenty of bad folks would rather you not have. I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and if not, while you're down in the comments, go ahead and let me know how I can do better so I can best serve that purpose of helping you. I hope you'll have a wonderful day, and until I see y'all in the next lecture for the next topic, I bid you all farewell.